It was a Sunday when Sarah brought home the music box. She was beaming as she came through the door, weighed down by 2 bags of trinkets she'd picked up from the flea market. "Get anything good?" I asked. She set the bags down on the kitchen counter and pulled out the music box. I could tell instantly that it was old, yet it was in immaculate condition. The rich mahogany gleamed under the kitchen lights as she passed the box over. I almost dropped it, surprised by the weight as she slid it into my hands. I took a closer look. It looked expensive, definitely an antique. The top was carved with intricate patterns and symbols I didn't recognise. The hinges seemed to be made of gold. It felt cold in my palms. "So, did we have to take out a second mortgage for this, or?" I asked. Sarah rolled her eyes and gave me a playful shove, knocking over one of the bags she'd set on the counter in the process. "Actually, it was free," she replied, picking up the bag and its contents. "Free?" I was incredulous. Something this nice should have cost a fortune. Sarah explained how the lady at the flea market had inherited a house from her deceased aunt, and they were selling up a bunch of the junk they'd found in the house. How the music box had given her a bad vibe and she just wanted it gone. "But you've not seen the best bit," Sarah said, grinning like a Cheshire cat as she opened the box. I watched as the tiny ballerina in the box sprang to life, spinning in an endless pirouette as the box music began to play. The music was like nothing I'd ever heard before, beautiful in a haunting way. It was sombre and sad. I was transfixed by the sound, lost in the flawless music. I glanced at Sarah and saw her staring at the box, a distant look in her eye and a smile on her face. Something about seeing her face like that, it sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, the music filled me with a sense of foreboding. The beautiful, sad music seemed like a warning. I looked back at the box. Behind the ballerina, set in the roof of the box, was a mirror. And for just a second, I thought I saw something in the mirror, a flicker of a shadow that didn't belong. But when I blinked, it was gone. I closed the box and the music stopped. "Great, right?" Sarah said. Her eyes sparkled, full of life as she looked at it. It was one of the many things I loved about her. How she'd get so happy over something most people would think of as mundane. Yeah, I replied, putting the box on the kitchen side, not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm. The next few days went by as usual. We ate, slept, and worked. Nothing changed, other than occasionally I'd come home to Sarah listening to the music box and watching that tiny ballerina spin in front of the mirror. I avoided it as much as I can. I was so busy with work that it wasn't hard. I was barely home most days. I can't deny, the music was incredible. Intoxicating, really. But something about it set me on edge. It was the next Saturday that I noticed something wasn't quite right. I'd woken early to make us breakfast. I was just plating it up when Sarah came downstairs and sat herself down at the table. She had bags under her eyes and couldn't stop yawning. She took a couple small bites of her food and then pushed the plate away. "You feeling okay?" I asked. She shrugged and smiled before saying, "Just a little tired." She got up and went into the sitting room. Seconds later, I heard the sound of the music box playing. I sighed and tidied up. We each had plans that day to meet up with some friends, her to visit a spa, and I was going to watch some football. It was a sorely needed chance to relax after the week I'd had at work, and it seemed to be just what Sarah needed too, because when she came home that evening, she had the sparkle back in her eyes and spent the evening filling me in on all the latest about her friend's new relationship. I smiled and nodded along. Not because I really cared about her friend's dating life, but because it made her happy. By the time we went to bed that night, I'd completely forgotten about the music box and my concerns over Sarah's obsession with it. That didn't stop that melody haunting my dreams that night. I don't remember the specifics of the dream, but I know that the music box melody was the soundtrack for it, because when I startled awake, I could still hear it playing in my mind. I sat up in the bed and shook my head to clear it, but even then, I could still hear the music. "Sarah?" I whispered, reaching a hand towards her. "Do you hear—" I stopped mid-sentence, my stomach tightening. Sarah's side of the bed was empty. I jumped out of bed and opened the bedroom door. The music was clearer now, floating up the stairs from the ground floor. I crept down the stairs. All the lights were off, but the street lights from outside spilled into the kitchen, where the music box sat open on the kitchen counter, and Sarah was dancing. I froze in the doorway, stunned at what I was seeing. Sarah had never been a dancer. In all the time I'd known her, she'd always turned down any opportunity to dance, saying she was too clumsy and had 2 left feet. Without wanting to be mean, that was apparent by the way she was moving as she attempted to dance what I assume was a ballet. Her movements were stiff and forced, almost jerky at times. "Sarah," I called, not wanting her to think I was spying. "What are you doing?" She didn't respond, just kept dancing. "Sarah?" I stepped closer, and it was only then that I noticed. Her eyes were closed, and they didn't open once as she twirled around the kitchen. I waited to see if she'd open them, but she didn't, and it was then that I realised she was sleepwalking. I'd never known her to do that before. I eyed the music box suspiciously. There was something wrong with that thing. I could feel it. I grabbed my phone off the counter and recorded a short video. I was going to need to have a conversation with Sarah in the morning, and I wanted to have some proof, as she probably wouldn't remember any of this the next day. Video taken, I was tempted to grab Sarah, to hold her and carry her back to bed. But you weren't meant to wake a sleepwalker, were you? In the end, I gently closed the music box. As the music cut off, Sarah's movements slowed and then stopped. Her eyes blinked open, and a look of fear crossed her face as she looked around the kitchen. "It's okay," I assured her, pulling her tight. "We'll talk about it in the morning." We both slept in longer than usual the next day, but once we were downstairs and Sarah had a hot cup of coffee in her hands, I took her through the events of the night before and showed her the video. To my surprise, she laughed. She thought it was funny. "You see now why I don't dance," she said. I didn't like her reaction. Something strange was going on here. I didn't understand how she couldn't see it and how she could be so blasé about the whole thing. But I think part of it rubbed off on me because I started to doubt myself. Should I really be that concerned by a bit of sleepwalking? Sure, she'd never done it before, and yeah, it was creepy, but maybe it wasn't worth getting too upset over. Sarah went up for a shower, and I decided to take a closer look at the music box. I traced my finger along its carved patterns and symbols. I picked the box up, carefully turning it over. It was just as heavy as I remembered, so I had to be extra careful not to drop it as I checked all the sides and then the bottom. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew it when I saw it. A name carved in small letters on the bottom of the box with 4 numbers beneath. R. Bartovski, 1796. The name meant nothing to me, neither did the date. I made a mental note to look them up when I had more time. I didn't want to risk Sarah catching me looking up the name online, so I waited until she went to bed that night before pulling out my laptop and searching through Google. After a bit of digging, I finally came across some information that I thought was relevant. Roman Bartovski was a prodigious music composer in the 18th century. He was going to be the next Mozart, if not better. But then, he went missing in 1797 under mysterious circumstances, just 1 year after the date on the box. With this all happening so long ago, the information was obviously a little spotty, but the website I found had pieced together what little information there was on the case. Foul play was suspected at first, but when the police couldn't find any leads or suspects, the rumours started to grow. Roman, apparently, had a dark side. Neighbours reported that before his disappearance, they'd often see him returning home in the dead of night, or hear strange chanting from his house. They'd put it down to him experimenting with his music at the time, but in light of his disappearance and some of the odd things found in his house, that conclusion soon changed. The belief then became that he was practicing some sort of witchcraft. The rumours grew worse when his niece, having inherited the house, died mysteriously 2 years later. Her husband came home late one evening and found her dead in the basement. No wounds, no injury, just dead, like the life had been sucked out of her. Some said Roman had opened a gate to hell in that house, and his poor niece had been its latest victim. I sighed. I don't know what I'd been hoping to find, but that information did nothing to help my sense of unease. No closer to answers, I put my laptop away and joined Sarah in bed. The music haunted my dreams again that night. I was walking through an old mansion, and, as is often the case with dreams, I had no memory of how I'd got there. The music floated through the dark hallways. I followed the sound as it wound through the mansion, leading me to a set of steps leading down into the basement. I didn't want to go down there. The music was louder now, and the flickering candlelight at the foot of the stairs made the shadows dance like they were alive. And yet, I found myself creeping down the stairs, one slow footstep after the other. There was another sound now, someone crying, a mournful wail almost drowned out by the music. I turned the corner and saw the music box sat in the middle of the floor, a pentagram painted in red around it. In the corner of the room stood a cage. A woman lay curled in the corner, her emaciated body covered by a thin white gown. She stared into the room, her unblinking eyes seemingly devoid of life as that hopeless wail came from her dried, cracked lips. I stepped into the room and picked up the music box, ready to smash it. The music was unbearably loud now. That's when I saw him. A dark figure in the corner, more shadow than man. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was watching. I could feel his laughter fill my mind, taunting me. And then the ground was shifting beneath my feet. The floor within the pentagram collapsed, a fiery glow surrounding me as I fell into the portal to hell. I jerked awake, my sheets soaked in sweat. I could still hear the music in my head. The song wouldn't leave me alone. Checking Sarah was soundly asleep next to me, I snuck from the bedroom, tiptoeing around the creaky floorboards to avoid waking her. The music box was still sat on the kitchen counter where Sarah left it, gleaming ominously in the moonlight shining through the kitchen window. I grabbed the box off the side, again amazed by the weight of it, and crept out the back door. The shed in the garden was a spider breeding ground, held up by the sheer number of cobwebs as much as any of the nails and bolts. It was the one place on the property Sarah would never go. Honestly, I avoided it as much as I could too, but it did make for the perfect hiding spot. The box safely stashed away in a garden pot on the top shelf, I wiped the cobwebs off and slunk back into the house as quietly as possible. I'm sure it was my imagination, but the house seemed lighter already, warmer, quieter. I slept soundly for the rest of that night. When I woke, Sarah was already up. I yawned and stretched, feeling pleased with myself, but also a little guilty. Undoubtedly Sarah would be looking for the box soon, if she wasn't already, and I'd have to pretend that I hadn't seen it. But still, it had to be done, didn't it? My good mood lasted until I opened the bedroom door and that haunting music met my ear. How the hell was it back in the house? I walked down the stairs, bracing myself for the accusations and running over scenarios in my head. She must have seen me last night. There was no other way she could have known where I'd hidden it. Sarah was sat at the kitchen table, an untouched piece of toast going cold on the plate in front of her. She didn't look up when I walked in, didn't take her eyes off that music box. I grabbed a cup of coffee, waiting for the telling off I was sure was coming my way, but it never did. After a few tense minutes, I crossed the room and closed the music box. Sarah looked up at me questioningly. "Sorry," I said, "I've got a headache." Sarah nodded and stood up, her eyes distant as she threw the uneaten toast in the bin and loaded the plate into the dishwasher, like she was running on autopilot. It was then that I noticed the cobweb in her hair. The Sarah I knew would never have gone into that shed to get the box, and it was even odder that she'd never acknowledged it. I managed to get us out of the house for the rest of the day, and it seemed to wake her up a little. The usual fun, bubbly Sarah surfacing for a day of shopping, eating, and a drink at the local pub. I tried to talk to her about the music box again, but every time I mentioned it, she brushed it off. Never once did she give any indication that she knew I'd hidden it. That was probably the last normal day I had with Sarah. Over the next few nights, I had that same dream. I traipsed through that old mansion, not wanting to, but unable not to follow the music. Each time there would be someone else in the cage. One night a young man, the next a little girl. They all looked on the verge of death, their gaunt faces staring at nothing. Some cried, some screamed, but none ever acknowledged my presence, only the shadowy figure. It was the third night when I woke from the dream to find Sarah wasn't in the bed. With a knot in my stomach, I slipped out of bed and crept to the door. As I'd feared, I could hear the music drifting up the stairs. I walked down the stairs, no longer caring to be quiet. As expected, I found Sarah in the kitchen, dancing in the moonlight, her eyes closed while she spun like the ballerina in the box. But unlike last time, her moves weren't jerky and unnatural. This wasn't the clumsy, endearing movements of my wife. This was something else. I watched as she glided around the kitchen, each move smooth and graceful, her pirouettes tight and controlled, like she'd been dancing for years. I knew then I had to do something more drastic than just hiding the box. It had to go, because whatever evil was in that box, it was taking control of Sarah. But first, I had to wake her up. I crossed the kitchen to the box and closed it. But just as the lid was closing, I saw him. The dark figure lurking in the corner, a dark stain against the wall, barely visible in the faint moonlight. I froze, but as the box clicked shut, the figure was gone. With the music off, Sarah slowly began to wake. Again, she wasn't concerned that she'd been sleep dancing, and I didn't push the issue. I knew by now that she wasn't going to take my concerns seriously. She was clearly under the influence of this thing, and it was on me to save her from it. I took her back to the bedroom and waited until she fell asleep, then slunk back out of the room and down the stairs, using the torch on my phone to avoid turning on any lights. The shadows twisted around me, almost as if they were alive as I descended the stairs and entered the kitchen. My heart lurched into my throat at each tiny noise. I kept expecting to see him again, the shadowy figure from my dreams, but I saw nothing. The box was even heavier than I remembered as I pulled it off the kitchen side and snuck out the door. It may have been my imagination, but as I held that cursed box, I swear I could hear that laughter in my head again. I threw the box into the passenger seat and started the car. I was worried the engine might wake Sarah, but if it did, I'd just have to deal with that when I got back. I wasn't going to leave that box in our house for another night. I drove to the nearest lake, about 20 minutes away. The car park sat empty. No one else was stupid or desperate enough to be out this late. I followed the trail from the car park, jumping at every little noise until I reached the pier. I dropped the box into the murky water at the end of the pier. It hit the water with surprisingly little splash considering how much it weighed. I felt good as I drove home, like a weight had been lifted, but as I got closer to the house, I started to feel the guilt returning. Sarah really loved that music box. She was going to be pissed when she found out what I'd done, and I couldn't really blame her. I'd be pissed if she did it to something I loved. I told myself it had to be done, that there was something evil attached to that box. It was for her own good. Still, I felt guilty, and I knew I'd struggle to sleep when I got home. So I sat on my laptop and did another internet search for Roman Bartovski and music boxes. When that search ultimately turned up nothing, I turned to the combined wisdom, or lack thereof, of Reddit. I kept the details in my post vague. I just asked if anyone knew anything about the music box. I didn't expect a response, but it was worth a shot. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was just putting off going to bed, knowing the guilt would make it hard to sleep, but I pulled up the video I had of Sarah, the one of her sleep dancing that first night. I watched the uncoordinated dance, the jerky, almost puppet-like movements, and that was when I saw it. A shadowy figure lurking in the background, half hidden in the dark hallway behind her. He was only in the video for a second, less maybe, but I knew it was the same figure I'd seen earlier that night, the same figure I'd been seeing in my dreams. Bartovski. I rewatched that clip countless times. There was no doubting it. He was there. It defied all logic. It made no sense. It completely obliterated my worldview, but I knew then I'd made the right choice getting rid of that box. When I finally went to bed, I had a dreamless sleep. I should have woken feeling good. I'd done what was needed to protect my wife and home, but I woke to the haunting melody of the music box drifting up the stairs to taunt me. I dashed down the stairs, my stomach sinking further with each step as the music grew clearer. There it was, sat on the kitchen table in a small puddle. The music box looked completely unaffected by its midnight swim. Sarah didn't even look up when I entered the room. If she did, she would have seen the panic and confusion on my face. In that moment, I couldn't have acted normal if I wanted to. I thought I was going to be sick. But Sarah was transfixed by the box. She couldn't take her eyes off it. She looked even thinner now, almost gaunt, and her eyes were bloodshot. A sudden rage filled me. I grabbed the box off the table and launched it at the wall. It collided with a dull thud, leaving a small hole in the plasterboard. The music abruptly shut off as the lid slammed shut, but it didn't shatter like I'd hoped. It didn't even have a scratch. Sarah didn't react. She didn't get angry or ask why I'd done that. She didn't even blink. She just sat there staring at the puddle of lake water on the table where the box had been sat. I stormed out of the room, my mind racing. I quickly threw on some clothes and went for a run, needing to clear the adrenaline out of my system and hoping the fresh air might help me think clearer. When I returned home 20 minutes later, I never was very good at running. The music box was playing again. The music seemed heavy somehow. It hung in the air, forcing its way into my ears and gnawing at my mind. I gritted my teeth and went into the kitchen. Sarah hadn't moved an inch, but the music box was back on the kitchen table. I closed the box and the music shut off. After getting us both changed, I guided Sarah to the car and strapped her in. She didn't resist. She moved wherever I moved her, completely pliable and compliant, but she would do nothing for herself. We had to wait in the emergency room for 3 hours before we were seen by a doctor. Obviously, I didn't tell them everything, just that she'd been feeling unwell the last week and took a turn for the worse this morning. The doctors were confused but didn't seem to be as worried as I was. They ran some tests before sending us home, promising the results in a couple of days and telling me to make sure she ate and got plenty of rest. I left feeling disheartened. I didn't know what I was exactly expecting the doctors to say. I knew the cause of the condition wasn't anything natural, but I'd had to try something. And maybe the results would give me some insight into how I could help her, if we could just get through the next few days. I put Sarah to bed, making sure she ate something before I left her to sleep. She didn't resist, but she didn't help either. She didn't do much of anything. It was a surprise when I put the food to her mouth and she began chewing on her own. Once she'd eaten and was laying down, I booted up my laptop. I checked Reddit, and to my surprise, I had a message. It was from an anonymous user. All it said was, "If you have the box, get rid of it as soon as you can. Destroy it if you can. I can't explain it, but that music box is evil. I don't know how, but I know it killed my mum. Good luck." I reread the message 4, maybe 5 times, then sat just staring at the screen. I wasn't sure what I was meant to be feeling in that moment. Some sort of vindication that I hadn't made it all up? Relief that it wasn't just in my head? Maybe I felt a little of those things, but to be honest, I just felt more scared. The message hadn't really offered any practical advice I could use. I'd already tried to get rid of the box, but somehow it just came back. I'd thrown it against the wall and it hadn't left so much as a scratch. I could try other ways to destroy it. A sledgehammer, or maybe fire. Yeah, I like the sound of burning that box to ashes. But if I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. I messaged the Reddit user back, asking if they could help me destroy the box. I didn't really expect them to help, or even reply, but I was desperate. I spent the next couple of hours browsing occult websites, searching for any information I could find on how to destroy cursed objects, stop evil spirits, or perform exorcism rituals. I didn't expect to need the last one, but you never know. The information I found was a mix of fictional stereotypes to the downright peculiar. In the end, I settled on a combination of things to try. First, I'd need a few supplies, but I didn't like the idea of leaving Sarah alone. I peeked in through the bedroom door. She seemed to be asleep, and I really needed those supplies if I was going to do this. I was never into religion, but given what I'd seen the last week, I couldn't deny there were things out there beyond my understanding. The various instructions I'd found online had called for holy oil, blessed salt, holy water, and prayers. Who was I to argue? But that meant my first stop was a church. My plan was to take the box to an isolated area and then surround it in a salt circle like I was a Winchester. Then I'd douse it in holy oil and burn it until it was nothing but ash. Then I'd use the holy water to extinguish the embers, all while reciting lines from the Bible. I'd printed out the relevant pages. And if all that failed, I was going to smash it with my sledgehammer. It took a while to find a church with a priest that was willing to take me seriously and to help me get my hands on the items I needed. Then I had to stop at the hardware store to pick up the hammer. By the time I got home, darkness had fallen. My stomach tightened as I pulled into the driveway. Something was wrong. I could feel it. I rushed into the house, needing to see Sarah was okay, and left everything I'd picked up in the car. I could hear the music box playing before I had the front door open, but nothing could have prepared me for the scene I found in the kitchen. Sarah stood in the middle of the room, her wrists held by a shadowy figure. "Get away from her!" I yelled, rushing at the figure. I dove at him, slamming my shoulder at his side. I passed straight through him, colliding painfully with the kitchen cupboard instead. I spun around as Bartovski's deep laughter filled the room. I looked up at him from the floor. I was closer now. I should have been able to make out his features, but he had none. No matter how close I looked, he was just a silhouette. Yet somehow he had hold of Sarah. Her face was contorted in pain, her eyes scrunched tight. I could see the life draining out of her, her skin growing pale. "No," I sobbed, and in that moment I made a decision. I couldn't live in a world without Sarah. I wouldn't. Take me instead. Let her go." Bartovski turned his featureless face towards me. He studied me for a moment. Then, without warning, he let go of Sarah's wrists. She crumpled to the floor. Bartovski held out his hand towards me, waiting. I stared at Sarah. The slight rise and fall of her chest told me she was still alive. My offer had been accepted. "I love you," I whispered to her, and without looking, I took Bartovski's hand. I felt an intense pain in my chest, followed by a sensation I can't adequately describe. It was like I was being pulled forward, yet I wasn't moving. The room grew dimmer until there was nothing but darkness. My life for Sarah as I thought as the darkness took me. That was a good trade. I didn't lose consciousness like I'd expected to. I just floated in an endless void. Is this death? I thought to myself. It didn't feel right. Eventually I became aware I wasn't alone in the darkness. There were others around me. They stood staring blankly ahead. I called to them, but they didn't respond. They didn't even react. I don't know how long I stayed in that darkness. Time lost all meaning. It could have been days. I didn't get hungry. I didn't get tired. I tried to sleep anyway, but found myself unable. I could feel my mind beginning to fray at the edges. I suddenly understood the stupor of the people around me. How long had they been trapped here? How long had I? Then suddenly, light appeared. It was blinding in its abruptness, and I found myself standing in my kitchen again. Sarah sat at the table, her red eyes unfocused as tears rolled down her cheeks. The music box sat open at the table in front of her, the ballerina spinning its never-ending dance as the music filled the kitchen. A subtle shift, but that music was so ingrained in my mind by now that I'd noticed it immediately. There was something familiar about the change to the music. There was something in it now, something that felt intimately familiar. Something that felt like me. Sarah seemed to notice too. She sat up a little straighter, her eyes focusing on the music box. "John?" she whispered to the box, her eyebrows knotting in confusion as she tried to shake off the fog and figure out the impossible. The impossible fact that I was somehow in the music. The dark figure, Roman Bartovski, the genius composer involved in some dark arts, had somehow taken me, my soul, my essence, and condensed it down, manipulated it, trapped it in the music box, and somehow composed me into his melody. I heard laughter from behind me. Sarah didn't react to the sound, and I didn't need to turn around to know what I'd see. I did anyway, and there he was, Bartovski, his form a shadow in the kitchen, a dark smudge, a blemish on the world. Behind him stood the others, men and women, the old and the young, all the people Bartovski had trapped in his music box over the last 2 centuries. Most stood still, staring at the music box. The light in their eyes faded to nothing, broken. One woman sat on the floor, legs curled into the fetal position and rocked back and forth, her straggly grey hair hanging over her face. She hummed to herself but didn't look up. I turned back to Sarah, who was still transfixed by the music box and its melody of souls. A chill ran down my spine. I turned to Bartovski. We had a deal, me for her. I reached for her, to try to warn her, but my hand just passed through. That laughter filled my head again, and I knew it was futile. I'd been tricked. I'd traded my soul for hers, and now there was nothing to stop him taking her anyway. I watched, tears in my eyes as Sarah eventually closed the music box. When she did, the world turned back to black, and I was once again lost in that void that would be my home forever. At least I'd be reunited with Sarah soon.